Thank you very much for sticking around. I know it's kind of towards the end, and you guys are all troopers. So I'm going to talk about Agile and the Agile principles and how we can use those from the development concepts and implement that into our writing, depending on, well, regardless of whether or not we actually work in an Agile environment. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a couple of minutes and put people on the spot who are late. You're distracting from me. We talked about this. So, who am I? I am Mikey. I work for Red Hat. I work with Finton, who was talking here earlier. We work in the same team, documenting JBoss Fuse, JBoss AMQ, and I live in Czech Republic. And in my previous job as a technical writer, I was also a Scrum Master in an Agile environment. Not officially certified because the company I worked for didn't really feel like we needed to. We just kind of pick it up from the air, but whatever. So I was able to get a glimpse into the Agile environments. Before that, I worked in a strictly waterfall company. I'm going to explain all this later if nobody really knows what I'm talking about. So I've had experience working in different development environments, and I've made some observations, which I try to implement in my own personal work processes, and also try to kind of feed them and slowly spread them around to the environments that I work with, because I think they're awesome. So it doesn't always work, but so who am I not, which is important. I'm not an expert in Agile. I'm not an Agile coach. Like I said, I don't have any formal, I'm not a certified Scrum Master, and I don't have all these lists of certifications. What I'm sharing is my personal experience, things that I've observed over the years, and I am not the Yoda of Agile, I'm not even the yogurt. So, although what I lack for in knowledge, I try to make up for in theater, so hopefully, at least it'll be entertaining and keep you awake. Why are we here? For this, I actually had a little brainwave, and thank you, Christine, if she's here, for putting people, asking for volunteers to write stuff on a board, because I think it's great, and if anybody's worked in Agile, especially Scrum, we love games. So this is going to be a little game. And I want to ask for 2, maybe 3 volunteers. One, and before I ask you, I will tell you what I need, because it's easier. I would like you the volunteers, to come here and write on the board one of the things that you want to get out of this talk, right? Like, what is the most important thing that I want to try and learn, or that I want to find out, or if I'm just here for the lulz. So I would like first a volunteer, if you would like, who's never worked in an Agile environment before, like a formal Agile environment. Nobody's ever worked in an Agile environment. Nobody's never. Nobody's never? Okay. Right, okay.
What is a formal Agile environment?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, okay, so, who you've worked, no, I mean, in terms of, software development and things like that. So, if you've never worked in, a proper Agile unit, Scrum, Kanban, Lean, if any of these practices were not officially implemented in your company, what would you like to get out of this talk? What do you want to find out, and feel like at the end? Do you want to come up here and write that? Excellent, thank you very much. It's very important. Understood. There you go. And I'm going to keep doing it. And the other volunteer I would like is someone who currently works in a proper Agile environment, and I know there are a few of you here. So, come on. Yes, thank you very much. This is how we collaborate, you know. And the third one is someone who's either worked in an Agile environment and doesn't work there anymore, or somebody who doesn't and is currently thinking or talking about migrating to Agile. Come here. I will explain why we're doing this in a little bit, okay? But in the meantime, I'm going to keep talking. So the last thing I want to do before I sort of dive into it is to give you a fair warning that this is probably the most interesting my slides are going to get, because I wanted to have it more of a talk. It's a talk, and the only reason why I would like to have these slides is either to give a very general description of what I want to talk about, because I do want to try and get as much participation or interactivity as possible. And the other reason why I like to have slides is because I can use memes. Okay? And I know we were talking about cultural references, so I tried to keep it very general. So people like slides. So I'm going to have some, but they're not necessarily going to be the main thing. And I know we're in Prezi, so I apologize in advance, but I don't work in Prezi, so I'm not bound by that. Okay. Thank you very much. Give it again. So, the first one would be, what the hell has Agile to do with docs? Which is a very important question. Exactly, what's in it for me? Why do I care? Okay, the next one would be, that's from the no Agile environment. The second one is, how do we deal with Agile that is in reality chaos? Excellent. I love it. I love it. You guys are great. And how can I justify my continued employment to my boss when Agile says no docs? This is interesting. I love this. Okay, this is one of the most important things that I can take and use it, okay, as sort of a guideline to see what people care about. Okay, because an Agile talk can be just everything. It can be anything. Why does it say 13 minutes? I have a 40-minute talk. I guess, do I still have the 40 minutes? Okay. I'm not even looking at that. Somebody needs to tell me when my time is up. Okay, great. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to keep this in mind. So unless anybody has strict objections to this, because I think those are very important things that we want to think about. And my goal here is to make you guys think and consider different options and take what you can, what you want, and try to just make your lives easier. Because the work will be work no matter what we do, how we do it, but it's just a matter of how we feel about our work and how do we do with our day-to-day stuff and how do we integrate. I'm a writer. How do I work within the document, within the development process, where I just keep hopping around the developers going what did you guys do? Can I write about this? It's all very it's still fairly young in the way that people treat their writers. So I'm going to give a little bit of background, and Christoph already helped a lot, and some other people who were talking about why did we even come up with Agile? What do we need it for? Where did it come from? So I'm going to keep it brief. Basically, in the beginning, there was waterfall, and waterfall is another implementation or application of production processes where you have let's say the factory line of a car, and the car goes all the way to the end, and then you sell it. But then if something is wrong with the car, you can't bring it back to the factory. You can, but it's a massive recall, and there's a big mess. So when they tried to apply that to software products, didn't really work all the time. In the beginning, it worked when you had time, right? So, but up until the mid-90s, the hardware, a lot of the software was meant to accompany the hardware, right? And in the mid-90s, people got personal computers. Late 90s, we got, the internet was everywhere. People were building websites and browsers and operating systems and everything, and users got impatient. All of a sudden, we didn't have time anymore. The deliveries had to be faster. People's attention span got shorter, and it still does. When you think about browser like Google Chrome releases, a new version every 6 weeks, something like that. And it used to be for, your operating system, you have it maybe 1 or 2 years before you get a new version. Not to mention the fact that we still had CDs, boxes, and things like that. You actually could go to production. So there isn't really time for that anymore, and things need to change, especially in the software world. I'm not a hardware writer. I don't know how they still do it in hardware. I'm sure a lot of the stuff is still pretty old school, I would say. But in the software, because it's all sort of up in the air. There's internet everywhere. People has computers everywhere. So you really don't have the time to start saying, oh, we'll give you another version in like 2 years, okay? Because one of the basic principles of waterfall is you design everything first, and then you develop everything, and then you integrate everything, test everything, and then you have a product. So in the changing world, there wasn't space for that anymore. So the incremental, I have no words. The incremental iterative development, which basically goes through the entire cycle multiple times and tests everything, and then you basically, for every iteration, you end up with something you could potentially sell to a customer, or at least show to a customer with the intention of selling them a final product in the future. So that was a really good tool to do that. So then what happened is, the software world is, full of early adopters, and everybody's going like, great, we have something with a name, with a list of principles. We can put processes on it and apply it in a very sort of structured way. So that's great. But then what happens is humanity got in the way. Excuse me. And a lot of the practical application of the different agile methodologies and the agile principles sort of got skewed along the way, and people, see, this is funny, right? Because I'm telling you to take things from here, only what you want. But on the other hand, I'm not suggesting that you take, like, let's say, like one sort of principle and say, look, oh, I'm working agile now, I'm only doing this. So, see, that's the problem, is like we really don't, like, people started using agile as just like a buzzword for anything that's not sort of the classic development process. So we're like, oh, we're doing agile, but it's really chaos, So, and on the other hand, you have a lot of companies nowadays that, in practice, work in an agile way, but in an agile, adaptive, very flexible way. But they're like, oh no, we're not going to call it agile because then people will get like annoyed, or So basically, we've forgotten what the true meaning of being agile is. And I don't have a slide with that definition. I had it in my abstract, and I should have done that. But it's basically to be able to be flexible and to adapt to whatever environment it is that you work in. And as a writer, it's very important to me. And this is why Agile is important for documentation. Because as a writer, I'm kind of like a free agent. I'm sort of parachuted into a company, for the most part, at least my experience and the writers that I've met so far. A lot of them, we get sort of thrown in there, there's a new company, you have to learn a whole bunch of new technology and sort of hit the ground running, right? And the developers and development units, they work in whatever way that they were working in. I have to adapt. I have to be flexible. They hired me because I'm a good writer. They didn't necessarily hire me because I am familiar with the technology, and they definitely don't expect me to have exactly the same work process experience, right? So at the end of the day, I need to be able to look at what environment I work at and see how I can fit in. And I'm just going to share a little bit of what I learned over the years, what helps me, and then you can see if it works for you, just see if it makes you think. So I've taken the Agile Manifesto, which came out in 2001, after a summit they had a whole list of people that I can't even remember all their names, but there's a link. And it basically summarized the 4 basic principles of agile development. And I'm just gonna go through them a little bit, not gonna dive in because it's all very subjective and you can interpret it and apply it to whatever you're working on. So the first principle is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It sounds scary, and it sounds like absolute chaos, but when you think about it, you have people that you work with, right? When I work in, let's say, even in distributed teams, right? Right now I work for a product where I have 0 developers in my building, and none of them I think are even in the same country where it's been. Do we even have developers in Czech Republic? No, we have like a few QA people, And that's it. Like, all of our developers sit remotely. Some in England, some in Ireland, some in the States. So how do you even, so yes, obviously you need a process to be able to have some sort of structure. But at the end of the day, it's better for me if I just pick up the phone, get on, I don't know, Hangouts, IRC, whatever it is. It's so much faster if I just connect to the developer and I ask him, hey, how does this work? Can you explain this to me? Can we set aside like some time to go over this whatever crazy cool feature that you want to tell me? And I've actually had discussions with developers that I've met since I started working at Red Hat, and they're like, not only do we have no idea what you do or how you do it, but we don't even know how we can work with you. So I'm like, you can just ask. The first thing you do is just ask, be like, hey, would you like to see this cool feature that I've been working on? And this is another thing that I've noticed with the writers is we have a bit of a, we get a little awkward sometimes. Well, in the beginning I used to get a little uncomfortable talking to the developers and being like, oh, they're working on their thing, I'm just kind of on the sidelines. But no, as soon as you realize the docs are a first-class citizen, if you think that way, that docs are a first-class citizen to the actual product that you're working on, which is one of the things that working in an agile environment has shown me that it is and should be, in my opinion, an integral part. Then you can have the confidence to come up to the developer and say, hey, I need some of your time, And yes, we are expected a lot of times to just get the product, get whatever specs, and sort of play around with it. So I try to do my homework, but but when it comes down to it, I would like to talk to the person who either wrote the feature as or tested it or has been involved in the process of making it. So I can take this information and translate it to English and deliver it to my users, okay? So while there is value to processes and tools, right, the individuals and interactions should, in my opinion, take a higher place. Especially now when we work, and when I work at Red Hat, which is, they don't work in an agile way, and it is very chaotic. So I've actually, in my work, I've progressed from being classic waterfall, very structured agile, and absolute mayhem. So like now I'm like right in the middle of trying to figure all this stuff out. So having to like talk about this stuff and research it and sort of remind myself what it was like to work in an agile environment, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, I can do this. And I can apply all these different things even without them knowing that I do it. So the next thing is working software over comprehensive documentation, which reaches the third goal here that we had, which is how do I even, what does comprehensive documentation mean? This is the first thing, because that can be really confusing. So we want working software, but we don't want any documentation to accompany it. No, that's not what that means. What it means is instead of showing, the original meaning of this, how they explained it, is that instead of showing the customer documentation, I want to show them working software. I want to be able to demo a software that's in progress, right? So when they're referring to comprehensive documentation, they're not talking about my documentation. They're talking about all the internal documentation that usually goes into extensive design stages. Functional specs, technical specs, like massive like test plans and all those different things. So what I can take from this is if I treat my docs as working software, right? When I build let's say a doc plan, and I can break it down into different components, I can break it down in a way that when I finish working on a certain section or chapter or feature area, right, then I can show my customers, who are the developers, the product owners, and whoever it is that my internal customers. I have internal customers and then I have external customers, which are my users. So I run my docs through the review process, but at any given time, especially when you work in a product that has continuous deployment, for example, you want to be able to break your plan in a way that when you finish working on a certain section, theoretically it can be published as it is. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to have the other sections of the book, right? So this is especially good. I had a point. There we go. This always happens in the middle. Okay, I'll probably remember it later. So, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Right, I'm not huge on contract negotiation, but customer collaboration is something that is inherently missing or lacking, in my opinion, in the tech writing field. This is why I love this conference, because you have so many people here who care about giving the writers and giving documentation a voice, you know? And for since I started working at Red Hat, I've been there for about 5 months. I went to FOSDEM, I went to developer conference, and I've always felt like I was kind of a guest in someone else's conference, even though they were talking about a lot of concepts that are relevant to my interest. But I always felt as a writer that I'm just kind of like a second-class citizen, and this is a really interesting turning point that I can see, I can observe. And we were just actually unified the technical writing department, the content services, as a part of customer engagement and there's another E in there somewhere. Experience, customer experience and engagement, which I think is the perfect place for documentation to be at. You know, because over the years I've seen documentation being shoved into like some sort of between the cracks DevOps enablement something, you know? Like even when I was working at an Agile unit, I wasn't actually in the business unit of the product. I was like sort of an outside, like, I don't know, it felt like a tax collector, kind of like a necessary evil in a development unit. You know, it's like you had to have me around. Nobody's responsible for me. Like my boss was in the States. It was very confusing. You know, like what are you doing here? So I think it's great, and I think it shows a shift in the way people perceive documentation. So when I talk about customer collaboration, I want to, as a writer, I want to hear what the customer has to say. I want to monitor bugs that come in. I want to talk to support. I want to go out there and meet partners and customers who are actually using this product. And this is where something that I can do right now, even though I'm not necessarily working in an Agile environment. You know, this principle can be applied to different things in life. It doesn't necessarily, you know, we get so stuck on semantics that we forget the philosophies behind them and how we can use them. And we have a beautiful time right now, which is really, we have a freedom. Because a lot of the history already happened. I mean, Agile is kind of in its teens right now, where it's very much aware of itself. It keeps checking itself in the mirror, saying like, do I look okay? Like, what am I gonna do? What people think about me? You know? But this is a time where we can take these things that are already there, they're already out there, and we can remind ourselves what they're really about. So, and by the way, if there's any questions or if somebody wants to heckle, you know, go ahead. And the last thing is responding to change over following a plan, which is very tricky and can get very, very chaotic. So, for example, when I joined Red Hat, I was like, okay, so how long are the iterations? What's an iteration? What do you mean? How often do you release a build? It's like, well, you know, sometimes they'll have nightly builds, other times it'll be every couple of days. Like, but how do you, and they're just like, no, they just kind of write stuff, and they throw it in there, and then I have to pick it up, and I'm like, really? Okay. So I actually have a little game that I play with myself, which is I download the latest build, and I'm like, what changed today? Right? And this is where the personalities and interactions come into play, because I'll just be like, I just downloaded this build. What did you add? You know? So it is very chaotic, but if I try to sort of set my own time frames and give myself a structure, then I can extrapolate this order out of the chaos, right? And I'm still learning how to work with that environment. I mean, 5 months is not a lot. And I've spent half of that time learning how to like install my Linux box, which I've never used before. So, you know, this is And you have the added complexity of community docs, for example, or community development, right? So we have different contributions from everywhere. This is my first open source job, and I'm just still really kind of shocked at how massive this is. Sorry, but if I brought the fact that I brought my own sort of structure from my experience, and I can actually see where I can apply it. So you're able to sort of respond to the changes that are happening. You can try, right? It doesn't always work. Like sometimes like right now we have a release coming up and I'm like, okay, I'm almost done with this guide. Oh crap, they just added this whole new thing and they didn't even tell me. So we have to be able to adapt. Luckily I finished the stuff early. So I actually had time and the release was slipping a little bit. So you can manage, right? But the point is to stay aware and not just kind of, who's talking about sitting in front of your computer? Was that you? Yeah, we just kind of get stuck trying to madly rush to get all our docs done, you know? And that's dangerous for us, and that's dangerous for the overall result, because the quality of our documentation, if we write it without being aware of the sort of big picture, then it can get, you know, I always say that what I love about being a writer is that I can have the big picture, whereas I don't live inside my components. And somebody was asking, I think it was yesterday, we were talking about whether it's good for technical people or non-technical people, which ones make the better writers. It depends, you know, depends on what you're working on, but for the most part, I found that the fact that I'm not a programmer, and I am not a QA engineer, I don't know how to write a single line of code. But I have the technical, let's say, talent to be a good user. You know, and that's what I think is more important, is to be able to, especially because I write for enterprise software, but you know, some of us will write for more end user stuff. So it depends. Like some writers could use marketing skills, right? And some writers do need to be programmers if you're not writing really super crazy deep dive stuff, right? But the fact that I have the big picture, I can look and I can plan ahead to a certain extent a little bit better than the developers, let's say, that I work with. I can still dive into the details, but I can pull back. All right. Now I'm going to touch very briefly on the 3 aspects of Agile that I love. I know there's a ton more, okay? And I know I keep finding out new things every day, because there's so many flavors. But the 3 main things that I found were useful for me. First one is Scrum. Scrum, the reason the title is very witty is because Scrum comes from rugby. It's like a rugby play. That's about all I know about it. And I actually have this really awesome image, if you can understand it, that I was inspired by Nick, because he told me about this this different kind of Agile implementation. And then I look at it, I research it a little bit. That was yesterday, right? I look at it and I'm like, wait a minute, this is exactly what I want to talk about. So I'm just going to throw it out there. And where's the... So, in 2 minutes, you have a plan, right? You have the big plan, let's say, for the version, right? For this specific version that you want to release.
I thought we didn't have a plan.
No, you have a list of requirements, right?
The previous slide said we don't have a plan.
Following a plan, right? So there's a difference. No, like I said, the people that wrote the Agile Manifesto specifically said, while we believe that there's value to following a plan, we think that the other thing is more important. So they had it left and right. I haven't talked about them, so right. At the end, so you need to you have a product owner. And then you get the requirements from the customer. The product owner represents the customer, basically. What do I want to get out of this software? The reason I asked people to list these things is because one of the most important things in Agile, in Scrum specifically, is something called definition of done. Definition of done is basically like a 1 or 2 sentence description of what I want the product, the feature, or let's say my docs to do. So definition of done is a very tricky concept, because how do you summarize something like that in a sentence? And there's a whole big theory about it and a whole list of things you can do. But at the end of the day, the list of requirements, let's say from the customer, I want my product to do this. I want to be able to run this end-to-end scenario to perform a complex task with my product. I, as a writer, can look at that. What happened? Yellow, but yeah. I, as a writer, can look at that and I can say, okay, I'm planning this book. I want to write this book. What do I want my definition of done to be? Like, how do I want my readers, what do I want my readers to get when they read this chapter, when they follow this task, right? Because a lot of the documentation that I work on is task-based. So the task is the main thing, and a lot of the companies I've been working on with and heard about as well, they develop in very task-based. So when you develop something in an agile environment, and even not agile, so you break things into user stories, and the user story is basically end-to-end testable scenarios. So it's not like saying, I'm going to develop all the back end now, and then all the GUI later. No, I'm going to develop the back end, the GUI, the integration that's required for me to log into a website. Like, that's usually the example that people give, right? So I need the login page, I need the mechanism to be able to store my username and password, and I need the buttons to make everything work, and I need something to compare it with and log me in, right? So that is an end-to-end scenario. And my definition of done for that would be, I, as a website user, want to log into the website with my username and password, right? In a secure way. So you had security in there as well, right? So you can make it like a self-contained unit, which theoretically I can show to a customer and say, hey, look, we have a fully functional login page with very few bugs. That you can use. And then, we'll build the rest of the website later and we'll show it to you in 2 weeks, right? So the concept is you create a list of stories, and then at the beginning of a sprint, this is a sprint. A sprint is normally anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. I've worked mostly with 2. So in the beginning of the sprint, you have a planning meeting where we play all these crazy games, and points poker and all of these things with the stickers and the post-it notes, which is nice. And then the team creates the backlog. And then they start working on this backlog during the sprint. I'm rushing through it because I'm running out of time. And anybody wants to ask me more about that later. So I'm just kind of briefly going through it. So you build the list of stories or tasks that you want to do, and then you implement them, you demo them, you test them, you demo them at the end of the sprint. Like every 2 weeks you sit with the product owner, or with the UX, and with whoever else is involved in delivering this product. And then you have a retrospective where you reflect on how you did, what went well, what can we do better. So, and this is all facilitated by the Scrum Master, which is what was my job basically. So I was there accompanying a development team to make sure that they have everything they need, that they don't have anything that they don't need, so that they're not distracted by project managers shouting about customers, and so they can work, right? And so that there's a buffer between them and the management as well, which is great. So this is basically Scrum in a very, very, very brief way. So how do I as a writer even come into that, right? When you demo a product, the product at the end of the sprint, theoretically, you should already have at least the UI strings reviewed, if not some sort of very minimal documentation, right? But as a writer, I found for myself that writing sprint +1 has worked well for me. Writing the actual user documentation that goes along with this product. So throughout the sprint, I sort of check in with the development team, and I see what they want, what they're working on, if they need UI strings. That's great. And then towards the end, I can already start researching and playing with the product and seeing what I can do to write next time. So, and another thing if anybody has any integrated help in the product, then that's also something that is worth checking as well, is how do I match myself to the development process, which is the agile thing to do. Another tool that I love, which many times goes with the Scrum, which is Kanban. There's a difference between the Kanban methodology and the Kanban board. I'm going to focus on the Kanban board. And what I love about the Kanban board is that it's transparent. Everybody can access it, and I used a little example with the post-it notes, right? Because it used to be real post-it notes, but now they have tools that can simulate that, and you have cards. right? Every card has points assigned to it. Points meaning like estimates on the complexity. And then you move it between the columns. Every card has a name on it as well. So I can check at any time. A lot of companies will have these cards like on flat screens in the office or whatever. I can check who's working on something, if there's a blocker, right? Like if I have something blocking me from moving this card, like if I'm stuck waiting for a peer review, right? Then the deadline has passed or it's getting risky, I can block this card. And then somebody's gonna be like, oh crap, there's a blocker here. How do we fix it, right? So as a writer, I can actually use this to basically apply it to a lot of different things that I do. I can use, instead of writing a proper like outline table of content style doc plan, or even if I do that, because it's easier to review and sign off on it afterwards, I can translate that into some things that are a little bit more interactive and give people access to it, right? So this is assuming, of course, that people want to check this, right? But like even if they don't, like I've been at situations where I started, I set up some sort of crazy template for my weekly reports, right? And people sort of started rumors going through it, and they're like, okay, well we can use that, right? So you never know what happens if you try something and you see that it works really well, and like things will sort of trickle forward, like bubble up or trickle down to wherever it is that you need to go. And the third concept is the concept of lean development, which is based on the Toyota manufacturing thing, where it's basically eliminate waste and decide as late as possible, deliver as fast as possible. So you minimize as much double work or waste, basically. So anything that doesn't give value, that's the basic concept of lean development. Anything that doesn't give value at the end is waste. So I can use that to cut my overhead, right? TPS reports, I didn't actually know what that meant, and I thought it was really cool. Because I grew up on these parodies and everything, but TPS reports is actually like, I don't know if everybody here knows it, and I just found out late, but you know, I don't care because I'm excited. It's like test plans, specifications that you just, you know, write these great big giant documents about how you're going to do your test. Instead of spending the time on writing about how you do the test, write a good DOD, right? A good definition of done. And then you use that instead of these great big things, right? So you make everything concise. As a technical writer, we're supposed to be good at writing concise text, right? This is one of my goals as a writer, is to be able to not just go on and on and on, right? So there's nothing stopping me from using the technical writing skills that I have to write concise documentation and to write concise internal documentation and processes and goals and plans, right? So the criticism, right, that a lot of people will have towards agile methodologies, and what do I care as well, is I found the three main things that I deal with, and I was actually inspired a little bit by Riz Kelly with the death by. So this is death by apathy, the same thing, which is forcing someone to change their processes. You know, if I say, hey, you know, I'm all about this agile thing, and people are like, no. So, like, as a Scrum Master, it was really tricky for me to be able to work with teams that had agile thrust upon them, right? So, as a writer, I also take that and I try to empathize, you know, saying, I need a certain order and a little bit of structure to work, right? Even though you guys are very chaotic, then could you please, let's try and work together, right? This is all about the collaboration and interaction again, right? The second one is death by overkill. So one of the problems that occurred during Agile history is that people just got so hung up on meetings and planning meetings and retrospectives, and Scrum of Scrums is basically if you have several teams working in a Scrum, then all the Scrum Masters get together and they do their meetings. And when you think about like a planning meeting, it needs to be capped at 8 hours. That can be like, if they say 8 hours, it means that some teams will have 16. Like I've worked with teams that have had 2 days just to do sprint planning. No wonder they hated it, right? Like, you don't want to sit there for 2 whole days planning a 2-week sprint, you know? So this is another thing that you need to consider. And the last thing is that people get, this is following the death by overkill, right? So I found myself as a Scrum Master sitting there. Yes, I will give you 10 seconds to read it all. And now everybody laugh. Okay. I found myself as a Scrum Master sitting there before the Scrum of Scrum meetings, fumbling for something to say. Because I'm like, I know what we've done, I know what we need to do, but this meeting has been like so stretched out that you're expected to fill all these gaps, right? And they get caught up in graphs, and everybody just runs through the graphs. And these are graphs, let's say from the Kanban board, you can export graphs to measure KPIs. And if you're sitting there in a meeting with all the Scrum Masters, and all everybody does is, this is my graph, this is my other graph, and this is my other graph. And then it's like, nobody actually gets anything done, right? So we need to be able to stay focused. So this is one of the things that I've noticed that happen, and I try to sort of change that. One of the things I like about Red Hat is we don't have so much of this overhead, right? Like, yes, it is chaotic and can get a bit messy, but at the end of the day, if you find your own order, right, and if you find whatever methods you need to be able to keep yourself focused, then you can help others as well, right? I'm done. I hope that I answered these questions for the lovely folks that came down here and wrote. And if anybody has any other questions, I don't know how much time we have, but.
I have a question. Just yell it. So I think it's important to differentiate between regular Scrum and Agile and Safe. The scaled Agile framework,
Right.
which you showed on your slide. So are you working in Safe or in regular?
Right, see, that's the thing, right? Because I wasn't formally trained, I basically worked with whatever I have. I was apprenticing with other Scrum Masters with the company that I was working at. And then I was like, okay, so we're using these methods from the Agile thing. I'd never actually put a name to the methods, if there was an umbrella sort of name for everything we used. And then yesterday when Nick was talking to me, I looked at this website, I'm like, that's exactly what we did. You know, so the company that I work for actually worked in Safe. So this is why I showed this graph, because a lot of times in the bigger enterprises, when you have multiple development teams, you need a sort of checks and balances systems on top of the Agile units. So an Agile unit is small, right? It doesn't have a lot of developers. But, so yes, sorry, I should have made that clear. No, I was just excited about this graph because it showed exactly how I worked in my previous company. I didn't even know what it was called. So I hope that answers your comment.
Some more follow-up questions. Did you have PSI?
Well, we had release plannings, which is basically the same thing, right?
Ahead like what, 6, 7 weeks?
No, we had, we did have like, the product had 6 months for each version, roughly. And in the beginning, they would get whatever they could, the product owner will get whatever they could from the customer, from the market, based on different research or things that they think will be cool in 6 months. And they would create the backlog from that. And then during the individual sprints, we'd take the different bits out of that. And every sprint, we'd sit with a product owner, and then we'll be like, okay, so far we've done this much, and then we have a few more months until we need to do this release. Let's see where the market's at, what our customers are saying. You know, so every now and again, they would take the demos to the customers, or potential customers. So.
One more. Did you by any chance use a special tool to plan your work?
To plan my work as a writer?
No, the entire Scrum. Was this tool by any chance running?
No. Some teams in my previous company used version 1. We basically worked, what did we use? Well, we used the Kanban board to manage the sprint backlogs and everything like that. We also used Jira Confluence, so yeah. And SharePoint. So yeah, we kind of used whatever mishmash of tools worked for us at the time. So.
Time for one more question, if anyone has one.
You were commenting about trying to insert yourself in the process and not be seen as sort of this external person responsible for something that has something to do with the team. And I think that's probably most important about that. A lot of development teams function really well as agile units, and then you aren't part of that. And so it's very important to be part of those meetings and to be, say, documentation is just as important as development, and we need to discuss it in the planning meeting.
Oh yeah. I mean, one of the things that I try to do, right now I don't do that because I have Finton to take the heat for me. So we attend PM calls and planning meetings in my previous job as well. I was working really closely with UX in whatever design needed to be done for that specific feature. The UX and docs are very good friends where I come from. So we do try to get in on the planning meetings. Sometimes though, when you have the death by overkill, then we just kind of like, okay, just figure out what you want to do this next 2 weeks, and then I'll take the plans, and do it. But yes, it is very important, and I try to get in there as early as possible because it makes our job easier.
Great. Thank you, Mikey.